So as the sun sets photogenically on the Croisette and the famous Cannes red carpet, it's day 7 at Cannes for me, and it's been a pretty full-on day. Here's why. I mentioned before that there was a late entry into the festival this year, the new film by Ken Loach, Route Irish. Such a late entry that it's not even in the official Cannes catalogue. It got finished late and they pulled it in at the last moment. Now, whenever that happens, there's a buzz. Oh, the film is so important, they've pulled it in as a late entry. Now, usually what happens is that the films get screened in that very big cinema over there for the press. We all turn up at 8:30 and watch the films in there. However, in the case of Route Irish, because it was a late entry, there wasn't any space to screen it to the press, except for in the bunker in the Salle Bazin, which is upstairs over there, a tiny little screening room. So the united forces of the world's press were all wondering whether they would actually get into the screening of the Ken Loach movie. It was at 11 o'clock, people were starting to queue about 8 or 9 o'clock, and as it turned out, I did get in, which I'm very relieved about. So was it worth the anticipation, the worry, the anxiety? Well, yes and no. It's a Ken Loach movie, therefore it's always worth seeing. It's a political Ken Loach movie, and nobody does political movies like him. It's a story about the Iraq War, specifically about the use of private security contractors in the Iraq War. And there are things in it which you would expect from a Loach movie: good character playing, convincing characters, very fine, realistic, naturalistic acting. At some points, it seemed to me to be a little bit like Ken Loach does The Green Zone. Imagine Ken Loach having a go at the same material as Paul Greengrass. At its worst, it had some of the hectoring quality of Ken Loach's previous film Hidden Agenda. Now, that caused a big stink when it played here in Cannes several years ago. It was a film about Ireland, and I remember the press conference when the British journalist Alexander Walker, the late great Alexander Walker, was literally frothing at the mouth in anger that Ken Loach could have made such a film. I suspect in the case of Route Irish that it will go down better with the foreign journalists than it will with some of the UK journalists. But I don't think it's Ken Loach's finest work. I think in some ways it's too bald, in some ways it's a little bit contrived, but I want to see it again, because seeing anything after having gone through that frenzy of are you going to get in, are you not going to get in, always kind of slightly twists your opinion. So I liked it enough, but not a huge amount. The other stuff I've seen since I spoke to you last, however, been very interesting. I went to see Schastye, My Joy, which is a Ukrainian movie about somebody having an incredibly bad time in Ukraine, and it's about the moral and political and human corruption of the place. An awful lot of it depicts travelling across hideous Ukrainian roads, going nowhere. And as somebody who has actually spent a couple of weeks travelling from Moscow to Feodosia across the road to the Ukraine, I can attest that it smacked of truthfulness to me. I enjoyed it, but it's very grim. I was also pleasantly surprised by Blue Valentine, which stars Ryan Gosling and Michelle Williams. I had worried that it was going to be sort of whimsical, indie-spirited and slightly too fey for its own good. In fact, it was a wonderful portrait of the beginning and possible end of a relationship. I was very moved by it. I was very surprised by how much I enjoyed it. It's definitely a festival film. I wonder whether it'll look quite as striking away from the Croisette, but certainly yesterday it was one of the treats. The real surprise for me was a film which I didn't know anything about at all, Udaan. Now, it was great. It was a kind of a coming-of-age story at times. It reminded me of things like Lemon Popsicle and Wanderers. At other times there was little bits of Stand By Me in there, had a great big surging pop music score, and I really, really enjoyed it. But I bumped into Mark Cousins on the Croisette afterwards, and he was complaining, quite rightly so, that the Cannes Festival generally overlooks Indian cinema, and I think he's got a very good point, but I certainly enjoyed it, and it was a real treat. The other thing I treated myself to was I went down the Croisette to a little screening of the new documentary about the making of the Rolling Stones album Exile on Main Street, and the documentary was introduced by Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger turned up and said, "Oh, I'm very glad you're all here to see my documentary about the making of Exile on Main Street. It's great." And it was Mick Jagger. That's obviously me doing my Mick Jagger voice. It's directed by the same guy who made the Scott Walker documentary a couple of years ago, which I liked very much. I didn't think it was quite on that standard. It's certainly not up there with the Maisels' Gimme Shelter, which remains the definitive Stones work, but I love Exile on Main Street, and it was good to see that. Now, whilst I was doing all this, I obviously didn't have time to go and see the 6-hour epic that is Carlos, the story of the jackal. But Stephen, who shoots all these blogs, did. So Stephen, since I wasn't there, pass me the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Stephen. So Stephen, 6 hours watching Carlos. Was it worth it?
It's like a really good box set.
So, one more day to go for me here in Cannes. Fair Game, the Doug Liman movie, first thing tomorrow morning. And if you prefer Stephen's style of reviewing to mine here on the blog, why not let us know?